We're here in Davos for the World Economic Forum 2026. From private investors to world leaders, everyone is here for this week to see what comes out of discussions and remarks over the next few days. I have with me Mr. Pushkar Mukhevar, who is the CEO and founder of Drip Capital. So very quickly, we're clearly expecting a lot to come out of this particular forum this time. What are your expectations and what is it that you're looking forward to the most?
Great. No, thanks for having me. I think it's a very interesting time. I think if you look at globally with what's happening with geopolitics, with tariffs, with the trade uncertainty, and this whole fragmentation which you're seeing across different countries, right? New alliances are getting formed, alliances are changing. So I think that absolutely impacts everybody, whether it's industry, governments, and people in general, right? So I would say that I think is obviously like going to be a big focus on what's next in terms of how the global trade ecosystem stabilizes and what happens there. I think the second thing which I'm personally quite excited about is we are seeing AI, I think, which was obviously which has been a buzzword now. We're really seeing AI in production. And I think it's super interesting to meet some of the industry leaders and hear about how AI is actually now practically getting implemented and what implication does that have on manpower, on jobs, and what happens next. I think that would be another interesting area which I'm super keen on sort of hearing about and discussing.
Absolutely, it's definitely the future. But I'm going to pick on something you said in the first half, and that's tariffs.
Yeah.
Coming from your industry, what do you think are going to be the major challenges for small and medium businesses, especially with Trump's tariffs being announced, being increased, have more and more conditions put on it? Where do you think this is headed for small and medium businesses?
Yeah. Honestly, I think no one really knows, right? But I think just to share sort of what our observation has been. So we operate in India, work with a number of small and medium-sized businesses across multiple sectors, right? I would say that US has been and continues to be a very important trade partner for India. Almost 25% of India's exports actually are to the US, and much more so in certain sectors like ready-made garments, textiles, or seafood, or for that matter, pharma. And I think with this kind of uncertainty, it's extremely difficult for a lot of the MSMEs to plan and to navigate their business, right? I think when the initial set of tariffs got announced, I think that was sort of particularly starting August, which was where the tariffs to India from India actually went up to 50%. I think most people thought that this is going to be a short-term, 3-month sort of a situation where some trade deal will be announced, but now we're already sitting on 5 or 6 months. And I think many of the customers we work with, at least initially paused their orders or kind of stopped shipping out till there was some certainty, right? But I think now people are increasingly starting to look for new partners and figuring out how do they sort of navigate this kind of an uncertainty. And I think the other thing is that unfortunately, there's a lot of volatility in this, right? So tariffs could kind of, there may be a trade agreement, but there's no certainty on 6 months later, can somebody plan their business with that being sort of the final situation? And I think time will tell now how things evolve. But I think this is a challenging time for MSMEs, particularly in exports, who have to figure out how do they sort of, navigate this uncertain period.
Absolutely. And well, speaking of India, MSMEs do gradually over the years have become a big part of India's entire dream and plan of becoming a $5 trillion economy.
Yeah.
But what, in your opinion, would be the other key driving factors and conditions and situations and industries particularly that are going to have a big role to play in that particular vision?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think exports is a very critical element, and I think we've continuously seen export participation amongst MSMEs keep going up. But yet, I think if you look at the overall MSME landscape, I think it's less than 1% of the MSMEs which are actually participating in global trade, right? I think for India to realize that $5 trillion vision, one is, I think, of course, about how do you sort of, enable most of these MSMEs to be globally competitive and kind of remove all the barriers which they have to realize their full potential, whether it's document compliance, customs processes, whether it's access to trade finance. So all these are some of the ground level challenges which these MSMEs face. beyond that, I think, AI is really a game changer, right? And I think everybody has been talking about, obviously, all the deep tech companies in the US, but I guess the application layer of India, I do believe, will be built in India because of the sheer size and vibrancy of our economy. I think we are likely going to see a lot more application-based companies which are going to really sort of build on top of many of these fundamental models, and not just build for India, but build for the world. I think we've done that in SaaS, in software, in IT services, and I think this is really an opportunity for us to take that sort of leapfrog jump and be the application layer for AI globally.
And speaking of AI, I think we did see in the last budget an announcement about more money being pumped into R&D, especially for our Indian demographics, like you mentioned. But speaking of the budget, it's going to be announced shortly.
Yeah.
What are your expectations out of it? And is there anything in particular that you're interested in seeing become reality for this financial year's budget?
Yeah. I think particularly given the tariff and the trade situation, more support to exporters and particularly MSMEs is going to be super critical, right? And whether it's the interest rate equalization scheme, which stands at about 2.75%, but sort of increasing that to 5% would be ideal, given that most of these MSMEs are competing with businesses from around the world. And many businesses actually have access to cheaper financing when it comes to, let's say, Southeast Asia, Japan, countries like that, right? The second thing will be that one of the things which we observe with many of our export customers is that they source a lot of raw material through imports, and they have a lot of GST refunds which are tied, right? And oftentimes, it takes a fair amount of time for them to get those GST refunds. So if the government could fast track that, that would be, I think, something which will be great. And I would say the third thing is there's an export promotion mission, I think, which is probably going to start like in January. And access to capital has been something which the government has spoken about. But yet, I think it's still heavily dependent on banks and more traditional sources, where having collateral, having just security becomes a huge challenge for many of the MSMEs. I think with so much of digitization which India has been able to accomplish, whether it's the GST data, whether it's the customs data, I think there is a lot of opportunity for fintechs to really enable that access, and government expanding the export promotion mission to not just include banks but also to include the broader fintech ecosystem could enable credit access for a lot many more MSMEs.
Absolutely. Well, a lot to look forward to, as you mentioned. The hope is that we do end up seeing at least some of these things in the upcoming budget session, if not this year, then next year. But clearly there is a lot more groundwork required, as you mentioned, in terms of processes and protocols as well.
Makes sense.
Well, that is it from my side here at Davos. This is day one at the World Economic Forum. A lot more lined up in the coming days, especially announcements and remarks from US President Donald Trump as well. What kind of impact will that have? We'll wait and watch.
Great.